Some people don't enter your life with fireworks. They show up at the wrong moment, with grease on their hands and nowhere better to be. And somehow, that's exactly what saves you. Victoria Sinclair had survived boardroom wars that broke men twice her age. She had negotiated deals in 3 languages and rebuilt a failing company before her 28th birthday. But standing in her driveway at 7 in the morning, watching water spray uselessly across her dead lawn from a hose split straight down the middle, she felt like the most helpless person alive. She wasn't crying about the hose. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The house on Clover Mill Road had been on the market for 4 months before Victoria bought it. She hadn't toured it in person. She'd had her assistant send someone with a camera, and she'd watched the walkthrough on her laptop during a layover in Denver, eating a turkey sandwich she didn't taste and saying yes before the video even finished. 3 bedrooms, a yard big enough that it wouldn't feel like a cage, a neighborhood where nobody would recognize her name. That was the only thing she'd really been buying. Anonymity. Delwood, Indiana was not the kind of place people came to be found. It was the kind of place people came when they were done being somewhere else. Retired couples who'd sold their Chicago condos, young families priced out of Indianapolis, a few stubborn old-timers who remembered when the grain elevator at the edge of town was still running. The main street had a diner, a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a bar that doubled as a pool hall on Friday nights. There was one stoplight, and it blinked yellow after 9 p.m. Victoria had grown up in a place not entirely unlike this, before the scholarships and the ambition and the long migration toward bigger things had swallowed that version of her whole. She didn't come back to Delwood for nostalgia. She came because she needed somewhere quiet enough that she could hear herself think, and she was terrified of what she might hear. She'd been there 3 weeks before she spoke to anyone who wasn't delivering something. The man who moved in the 4 houses down arrived on a Tuesday in early June, which Victoria knew only because she happened to be sitting on her front porch with a cup of coffee she'd let go cold, watching the street the way people do when they're not really watching anything. A rented truck pulled up to the tan house with the green shutters, the one that had stood empty since the Hendersons moved to Florida, and a man climbed out of the cab looking like he'd already been awake for 6 hours. He was tall, not in a conspicuous way, just the kind of tall that meant he'd have to duck slightly in old door frames, dark hair that needed cutting, a gray t-shirt with a faded logo she couldn't read from this distance. He stood in the driveway for a moment with his hands on his hips, studying the house the way people study things they're not entirely sure about, and then he went around to the back of the truck and dropped the ramp. A little girl jumped down before he could lower it all the way. She was maybe 5 or 6, with 2 lopsided pigtails and a pink backpack she was wearing despite the fact that they were moving, not going to school. She landed in the driveway and immediately started spinning in a circle with her arms out, just spinning for no reason at all, the way kids do when they're happy about something they can't quite name. The man watched her spin. Something in his face shifted. Not a full smile, just a loosening around the eyes, a small private thing, and then he went back to unloading boxes. Victoria watched for a few minutes, felt faintly like a voyeur, and went inside. She learned his name the way you learn most things about neighbors, sideways, without meaning to. She was at the hardware store 10 days later, standing in the plumbing aisle holding 2 different types of hose connectors and having no idea which one she needed, when she heard his voice 2 aisles over, asking someone about deck screws. "Reed," the man at the counter said, loud enough to carry, "you want the coated ones for outdoor. Regular'll rust on you by September." She didn't see him. She bought the wrong connector anyway, a fact she discovered the next morning when she attached it to the garden hose and turned on the spigot, and water immediately began arcing sideways from a crack she hadn't noticed, soaking her shoes and the bottom 6 inches of her linen pants. She stood there for a moment, water spreading across the concrete in a dark fan, and did not cry. She was very deliberate about not crying because she had already decided she was done crying over small things, and the garden hose was definitely a small thing. The fact that David would have laughed at this, would have come out in his terrible old flip-flops and stood in the spray pretending it was a fountain, would have gotten them both soaking wet and turned a broken hose into a whole afternoon. That was not something she was going to think about right now. She turned off the water and stood there with wet shoes. That the wrong connector? She turned. The man from the truck, Reed apparently, was standing at the edge of his own driveway 4 houses down, close enough that he'd clearly been walking in her direction already, with a paper bag under his arm that said Delwood Hardware on the side. "I think I bought the wrong size," she said. He walked over without being invited, which should have annoyed her and somehow didn't. He crouched down and looked at where the connector met the spigot, then at the crack in the hose itself. "Hose is split," he said. "Connector's not going to fix that." "I know," she said, and then, because she'd said it too quickly, "I just noticed." He looked up at her. He had brown eyes, slightly tired, the kind of tired that lives in a person's face permanently rather than coming and going with sleep. He didn't push the conversation anywhere. He just said, "Hardware store'll have replacement hose. They cut it by the foot." "Okay," she said. He stood up. "I'm Mason. I moved in down—" "I know," she said again, and then winced slightly at herself. "I saw you moving in. I'm Victoria." "Victoria." He said it like he was just checking that he'd heard it right. "Sinclair," she added, and then wasn't sure why she'd added it. Out of habit, probably. Her name meant something in most rooms. Here it meant nothing, which was what she'd come for, but she kept forgetting how to be without it. He nodded, not with recognition, just acknowledgement. "You need anything else out here? I've got a basic kit in the truck." He was already moving away. "No," she said. "Thank you, really." He lifted a hand in a wave without turning around, and that was their first conversation. What? She fixed the hose herself. It took 3 trips to the hardware store and 1 YouTube tutorial that she watched 4 times, but she fixed it. She told herself that was a good sign. Victoria's life, before Delwood, had been organized around forward motion. Every year had a plan. Every plan had milestones. She'd built Sinclair Capital from a 2-person operation running out of a WeWork in Columbus into a $2.3 billion investment firm with offices in 4 cities, and she had done it by never, not once, stopping to wonder whether this was actually what she wanted. The doing was the point. The doing kept everything else at bay. She was good at the doing. What she was not good at, what she was discovering, in the enforced stillness of this Indiana suburb with its blinky yellow stoplight and its hardware store and its neighbors who waved from their driveways, was the not doing, the sitting, the being present in her own house without a meeting to get to or a call to take or a problem urgent enough to crowd everything else out. The grief had always been there. She'd just been too busy to let it catch her. David Hartley had died 9 weeks ago. Cardiac arrest at 34 years old. He'd been in the middle of cooking dinner. She'd been on a call in the other room. She was always on a call. And she'd heard the sound and come in and found him on the kitchen floor with the burner still going and a wooden spoon still in his hand. And that was a thing she was going to have to figure out how to live with for the rest of her life. They'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. The wedding had been scheduled for October. People had been very kind. Her business partners had sent flowers. Her assistant had cleared her schedule for 2 weeks and handled the arrangements and never once made her feel like a burden. Her mother had flown in from Portland and stayed for 5 days and cooked things Victoria didn't eat and held her while she cried and been, unexpectedly, exactly what Victoria needed. But eventually everyone had to go back to their lives. And eventually the flowers wilted, and eventually her schedule filled back up. And Victoria had gone back to the doing because the alternative was too large to look at directly. She'd lasted 4 months. Then she'd bought a house in a town she'd barely heard of and driven there alone with 3 suitcases and told her assistant to hold everything non-critical for 30 days. Her assistant, who had worked for her for 6 years and had seen her walk out of a mediation at 2 in the morning and straight back into a pitch meeting, had simply said, "Okay, 30 days. Call me if you need anything." That had been 3 weeks ago. June moved slowly in Delwood. The heat arrived early and sat on everything like a hand pressing down. Victoria took walks in the morning before it got too bad, learning the neighborhood the way you learn a foreign language. Slowly, through repetition, picking up small details that started to form into something coherent. The Okafor family at the end of the street, who left a little free library box full of paperback romances and puzzle books. The elderly man 4 doors east who grew tomatoes along his whole fence line and seemed to be in a constant low-level war with the squirrels. The kids who rode bikes through the cul-de-sac every afternoon at the same time, like they'd scheduled it. She started recognizing Mason Reed's truck by sound, a specific rattle in the engine, a diesel cough on cold mornings. He left early, before 6 usually, and came back in the early evening with grease on his forearms that she could sometimes see from her porch. The little girl, who Victoria eventually learned was named Lily, came and went in a smaller car, driven by a woman Victoria didn't recognize, and Lily always waved at everything. At Victoria, at the Okafor's dog, at passing birds with complete democratic enthusiasm. Victoria started waving back. It seemed rude not to. Well, the second real conversation happened on a Thursday evening in late June, after a thunderstorm had come through and deposited a significant tree branch across Mason's driveway. Victoria saw it from her porch, where she'd been sitting watching the storm pass with a glass of wine she was nursing slowly because she'd been trying to be careful about that lately. The branch wasn't enormous, maybe 6 feet from a silver maple, but it was substantial enough that his truck wouldn't be getting out without help. She watched him come home, watched him park on the street, and get out and look at the branch with the particular expression of a person calculating how much more tired they're willing to become today. She walked down. "I have a handsaw," she said when she was close enough. "In the garage, I think." He looked at her. "You think?" "It came with the house. I haven't actually confirmed that it saws things." He almost smiled. "I'll go get my chainsaw." "You have a chainsaw." "Well, I have a daughter," he said, which was not a direct answer and somehow was. They cleared the branch together. It took about 20 minutes. She held pieces while he cut, and then they stacked them at the edge of his yard, and at some point Lily appeared on the porch in pajamas looking deeply concerned about what was happening to the driveway, and Mason called up that everything was fine, go back inside, and Lily called back that she wanted to help, and Mason said there was nothing left to help with, and Lily said she could sweep, and Mason said the driveway was wet, and Lily said that didn't matter, and the negotiation went on for a while. Victoria watched it. She couldn't entirely explain what she felt watching it, something that hurt in a way that wasn't entirely bad, like pressing a bruise and finding it was less tender than expected. "She's very persistent," Victoria said, when Lily had finally retreated inside. "She gets it from her mother," Mason said, and then was quiet for a moment in the way people are quiet when they've said something that lands differently than they meant it. "How old is she?" Victoria asked. 6, 7 in August. He bent to pick up a piece of branch they'd missed. "She thinks everything is a project she can be part of." "That's not a bad thing." "No," he said. "It's really not." He paused. "Thanks for the help. You didn't have to." "Branch was in your way. It wasn't complicated." He nodded. She walked back to her own house. They still hadn't exchanged phone numbers. The friendship, if that's what it was becoming, neither of them named it, grew sideways, the way things grow when no one is trying to force them. He replaced a board on her back fence that had rotted through because he noticed it while he was working on his own yard, and it was simply the kind of thing he fixed when he saw it. She brought over dinner one night without planning to. She'd made too much soup, a thing that had started happening since there was no longer anyone to cook for except herself, and she stood at his door with a Tupperware container feeling faintly ridiculous until he just said, "Come in," and that was that. She met Lily properly that night. Lily was small and very serious about certain things. Her opinion on the correct way to fold napkins was detailed and firm, and completely unbothered by strangers in the way that some children are, the ones who haven't been taught yet to be cautious. She told Victoria within the first 3 minutes that her name was Lily Ann Reed, that she was going to be an astronaut or possibly a marine biologist, but probably both, and that she didn't like corn unless it was on the cob. "That's very specific," Victoria said. "Corn from a can tastes like a can," Lily said, with the confidence of someone who had spent significant time thinking about this. Mason, stirring the soup at the stove, said, "She's been saying that since she was 4, without looking up. "Because it's true," Lily said. Victoria stayed for an hour and a half. She hadn't stayed anywhere that long without a professional reason since she'd arrived in Delwood. What she didn't tell him, for a long time, that she was not just a businesswoman taking a sabbatical. that the house in Delwood was not a vacation property, that the reason she sometimes sat on her porch until 11 at night watching nothing in particular was because going inside meant going back to the silence, and the silence was where everything she hadn't finished grieving was waiting for her. What he didn't tell her, for a long time, that the mechanic's job at Halsey Auto on Route 9 was not what he'd trained for, that he'd spent 4 years at Purdue on an engineering scholarship before things fell apart, that the woman who dropped Lily off on weekdays was his sister, not an ex-wife, because there was no ex-wife. Lily's mother had walked out when Lily was 18 months old and hadn't come back, and Mason had stopped expecting her to somewhere around month 7 and was mostly fine about it now, except for the moments when he wasn't. They were both people who'd learned to keep the hardest things close. July was hotter than June. The whole street sweated through it in varying states of resignation. Victoria started keeping the kind of hours she hadn't kept since college. Awake at 2 in the morning, asleep at noon sometimes, her body's rhythms completely untethered now that she wasn't running on a schedule. She was awake at 2:15 on a Wednesday when she saw the light go on in Mason's kitchen. She was sitting at her own kitchen table with a glass of water, not doing anything particular, just being awake in the dark the way you are when sleep keeps sliding away from you, and she saw it, the yellow rectangle of his window appearing across the dark yards between their houses. She didn't do anything. She just noticed it. The next time she saw him, at the end of his driveway where he was retrieving a package that had been left there wrong, she said, "You don't sleep much either." He looked at her for a second. "I thought it was just this summer." "I think it might just be us," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it as a neutral fact rather than a complaint. "Lily sleeps great," he said, "which is something." "What do you do when you're up?" He shrugged. "Fix things, mostly. There's always something that needs fixing." A pause. "Sometimes I just sit." "Yeah," she said. "Me too." She told him about David on a Saturday afternoon in late July. It wasn't planned. They were sitting on her back porch because she'd asked if he wanted a beer, and he'd said yes, and they'd ended up there without a clear intention, and the conversation had moved slowly through topics the way conversations do in the heat. His job, her vague explanation of being in finance, Lily's upcoming birthday. And then there was a stretch of comfortable quiet. And then she said it. Not everything. Not the specific details of the specific night, which she still couldn't say out loud without her voice doing something she didn't want it to do. Just that she'd lost someone. That it was recent. That this was why she was here in Delwood, in a house she'd bought from a laptop in an airport. Mason didn't say anything immediately, which was the right thing. He sat with it for a moment, turned his beer bottle in his hands, and then said, "How long ago?" 11 weeks, she said. Another pause. "He was your fiancé?" "Yeah." "I'm sorry." "People keep saying that. I don't blame them. I say it too when I don't know what else to say. It's just—" She stopped. "It doesn't touch it," he said. She looked at him. "Yeah." He nodded. He didn't say anything else about it, and she didn't feel pressed to continue, and they sat there in the heat for a while longer, until she went inside and got 2 more beers, and they talked about other things, and she felt, when he left, marginally less like she was carrying something alone. He told her about Lily's mother 2 weeks later. They were at the hardware store. They'd started doing this occasionally, going together, because Victoria had projects she kept attempting, and Mason had a practical working knowledge of what she actually needed versus what she thought she needed. She'd come to appreciate this about him without fully acknowledging it to herself. She asked, in the paint aisle, without any particular lead-up, "Is Lily's mom not in the picture?" He was reading the back of a can of wood stain and didn't stop reading it. "Not really." "Does Lily ask about her?" "Sometimes." He set the can down. "She's been asking more lately. She's getting to an age where she's noticing that most of the kids at school have—" He stopped. "It's fine. We handle it." "What do you tell her?" He picked up a different can, compared the two. The truth, mostly, that her mom left because she had her own things she needed to figure out, and that it wasn't about Lily. He paused. "Whether that's fully true or not, I don't know. But I'm not going to put a 6-year-old in the middle of something I'm still working out myself." "That's—" Victoria started. "It's just what you do," he said. "You do the thing that needs doing. You don't get to be wrecked about it when she's watching." She looked at him for a moment. "But sometimes you're wrecked about it." He put the wood stain in the basket. "I've had my nights." He said it simply, without self-pity, and moved on to the next aisle. Lily's birthday party happened on the first Saturday of August. It was not a large party. Mason's sister, whose name was Dana and who was louder and funnier than her brother and clearly found him mildly exasperating in the way of siblings, brought two of Lily's cousins. 3 kids from the neighborhood appeared with their parents. There were burgers and a cake that Lily had decorated herself with so much purple frosting that it was genuinely alarming to look at. Victoria had been invited almost as an afterthought, Mason mentioning it 2 days before with the slightly awkward energy of someone who wasn't sure if it crossed a line. And she'd said yes without really thinking about it, and then thought about it a lot in the days after, and came anyway. She was glad she came. Dana cornered her in the kitchen within 20 minutes, ostensibly helping carry plates, and said, "So, you're the neighbor?" "I'm the neighbor," Victoria agreed. "Mason talks about you." "We're friends," Victoria said. "Neighbors." Dana handed her a stack of paper plates with the expression of someone who had thought she was choosing not to express. "Of course you are." The party lasted 3 hours. Lily opened her presents with methodical thoroughness, thanking each person by name for each individual gift, which was at once charming and slightly unnerving in a 7-year-old. She got a telescope from Victoria, who had not been sure about it and had driven 40 minutes to the nearest bookstore, and also bought 3 books about space, and she went completely quiet for a moment when she opened it, and then looked up at Mason with an expression Victoria couldn't read. "For real?" Lily said. "Pointed at the moon tonight," Mason said. Lily threw her arms around him, still holding the telescope box, and Mason pressed his face against the top of her head for a second and closed his eyes. And Victoria looked away because it felt like something private. Later, cleaning up, Dana said to her, quietly, in the way people say things when they've decided to say them and are already committed, "He's had a hard few years, in case you hadn't noticed." "I've noticed," Victoria said. "He doesn't let people in easy." "Neither do I." Dana looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, like that answered something, and went back to collecting cups. Lily showed Victoria the moon through the telescope that night, from the backyard, with Mason standing off to the side with his hands in his pockets, while his daughter explained the lunar surface in great and largely accurate detail. The evening was still, and the fireflies were going, and the sound of the neighborhood at 9 o'clock was just dogs and a distant lawnmower and someone's music 2 streets over. Victoria looked at the moon through the eyepiece. It was enormous and pocked and bright, so close it seemed impossible. "Can you see it?" Lily asked. "I can see it." "That's actually the moon," Lily said, "like the real one." "I know." "It doesn't feel real when you can see it that good," Lily said, with the philosophical weight of a 7-year-old who has thought about this. "Like something must be wrong." Victoria pulled back from the eyepiece. Above them, the ordinary sky, the moon small and pale and normal. "That feeling makes sense," she said. She didn't look at Mason, but she felt him looking at her. She didn't sleep that night either. She lay in the dark and thought about David, the way she always did, but with slightly more space around it now, slightly more room to breathe around the shape of it. She thought about the telescope and Lily saying it doesn't feel real when you can see it that good. She thought about Mason's face when he'd said you don't get to be wrecked about it when she's watching, the simple hard competence of it. She thought about what it meant to keep moving when the thing you were moving away from was still with you. Whether moving away was even the right language for it. She didn't have answers. She was getting slightly better at sitting with the not having. Her phone was dark on the nightstand. No messages from Columbus. The 30 days had stretched past 60 without anyone pointing it out, and she had made some calls and managed some things and was not entirely absent from her own company, but she had not gone back. Not yet. She wasn't sure what going back meant anymore. She was starting to think it didn't mean what she'd assumed. The street outside was completely quiet. Somewhere 4 houses down, she assumed, Mason Reed was either asleep or not asleep, and in a small blue room with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, Lily was asleep under the moon she now partially owned. Victoria closed her eyes. She thought about ordinary things, the weight of a hose in her hands, water spreading across concrete, the rattle of a truck engine at 5:50 in the morning. A stack of paper plates passed from one hand to another by a woman who had things she was choosing not to say. Small things, the weight of them. She fell asleep around 3, which was earlier than usual, and did not dream. The thing about grief is that it doesn't keep a schedule. Victoria had learned this the hard way, had believed at some point in those first terrible weeks that if she could just get past the 2-month mark, then the 3-month mark, then the arbitrary milestones people mentioned in sympathetic voices, it would start to recede like a tide. Predictable. Manageable. Something you could mark on a calendar and plan around. It didn't work that way. She knew that now with the particular certainty of someone who had lived it. It came when it wanted. It came when she was at the grocery store and found herself reaching for a brand of coffee she hadn't bought in 3 months because she'd only bought it for David. It came at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning for no identifiable reason while she was answering emails. It came, and it left, and it came again, and there was nothing to do but be somewhere when it arrived that was better than the floor of a kitchen with a burner still going and a wooden spoon still in someone's hand. Delwood was better than the floor. That was the best she could say for it, and some mornings it was enough. August settled over the street like a warm animal finding a spot to sleep. The air had a thickness to it that didn't lift until well after dark, and even then it only thinned rather than cleared. Victoria had started keeping a fan in every room and leaving the windows open at night, listening to the sound of the neighborhood sleeping, the distant bark, the air conditioning units cycling, the occasional car on the main road 2 streets over. These were sounds that had no association with anything she'd lost. That was their value. She could hear them without them meaning anything except exactly what they were. She was sleeping better. Not well, but better. 4 hours became 5, became occasionally 6, and she stopped waking at 2 in the morning with the specific electric alertness of grief and started waking instead with just ordinary tiredness, which was progress of a kind. She was also eating actual meals, which Dana had apparently taken as a personal project without being asked. It started simply enough. Dana had come by to pick up Lily on a Thursday morning and ended up standing in Victoria's kitchen for 40 minutes, ostensibly because she'd accepted a glass of iced tea and then discovered that the refrigerator contained, in her words, an insult to the concept of a kitchen. "There's food in there," Victoria said, defensive. "There are condiments, and 1 container of yogurt that expired 4 days ago." Dana opened the freezer, considered it, closed it again. "You've got a full spice rack and nothing to put spices on. That's either tragic or philosophical, I'm not sure which." "I've been eating out. The only places to eat out in Delwood are the diner and the Taco Bell on the highway." "The diner is fine." Dana sat down at the kitchen table in the way people sit down when they're planning to be somewhere for a while. "Mason doesn't eat out. He cooks every night, mostly for Lily, but he makes enough." Victoria recognized the shape of what was being offered and felt the familiar pull between wanting it and not wanting to need it. "I'm not going to make your brother cook for me." "I'm not saying he cooks for you. I'm saying we eat together sometimes on the porch, and there's always extra." Dana picked up her iced tea. "He doesn't know I'm saying this, in case that changes anything." "Why are you telling me then?" Dana looked at her for a moment with the direct, slightly unsentimental expression she shared with her brother. "Because he's been out there alone for a long time, and you seem like someone who gets it, and because you both look like you could use a meal that has more than one food group." Victoria thought about it for a long moment. "What does he cook?" Dana smiled. It was the first time Victoria had seen her actually smile, rather than produce the dry half-expressions she used as punctuation. "Ask him." She didn't ask him directly. That wasn't how things worked between them. What happened instead was that she was out on her porch late on a Friday, working her way through a report she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks, when she smelled something from the direction of his house that made her look up. Garlic and something else. Something warm and heavy, and she realized she hadn't eaten since noon. She sat there debating with herself for a minute, which was longer than it should have taken, and then walked down the street. His front door was open. Through the screen she could hear the radio, old country, which she hadn't expected, and the sound of something in a cast-iron pan, and Lily's voice asking a question she couldn't make out. She knocked on the frame. Mason appeared in the hall, still holding a spatula. He looked at her for a second without saying anything. "I can smell that from my porch," she said. "Pork chops," he said. "I haven't had pork chops in approximately forever." He looked at her for another moment, assessing nothing in particular, and then pushed the screen door open with his shoulder. "Come in. There's enough." Lily materialized from nowhere at the sound of the door and draped herself over the back of a kitchen chair the way children drape themselves over things when they're in a good mood. "Victoria's eating with us?" "Apparently," Mason said, going back to the stove. "I get to set the table," Lily announced, as though this were a significant achievement she'd been waiting to deploy. "You set the table every night," Mason said, "but now there's more table to set." Victoria sat at the kitchen table, which was slightly scarred and had a ring from something that had been set on it too hot, and watched Mason cook. He was economical about it. No wasted movements, no consulting his phone, just a person who knew what they were doing, going ahead and doing it. He changed out of his work clothes, but not particularly into anything, just jeans and a t-shirt, and there were still traces of grease along his forearms that soap hadn't fully reached. Lily set 3 places with the focused precision of someone doing a job correctly, explaining to Victoria as she went which fork was the salad fork. There was no salad. And which glass was for water, and which was for juice, if there was juice, which there wasn't tonight, but good to know anyway. "She's thorough," Victoria said. "She spent a week convinced she was going to be a restaurant critic," Mason said from the stove. "I still might be," Lily said. "I thought it was astronaut marine biologist." "I can be 3 things," Lily said. They ate on the porch because the kitchen trapped heat, and the night was only marginally better, but at least the air moved. Lily ate with the focused intensity of a child who had been active all day, and between bites asked Victoria questions with no sense of which ones might be awkward. Did she have kids? Did she have a dog? Why did she live alone? What did she do at her computer all day? Had she ever been in an airplane? Had she ever been in a spaceship? "Nobody's been in a spaceship who eats dinner in Delwood," Mason said. "You don't know that," Lily said. Victoria answered each question with the same directness Lily deployed in asking them. "No, no dog. She worked in finance. She traveled a lot for work. No spaceship." "Are you sad about not having kids?" Lily asked. Mason said, "Lily," in the tone parents use when a line has been approached. "It's fine," Victoria said. "No, I'm not sad about it. I've just been focused on other things." Lily considered this, apparently satisfied. "Dad says you can be focused on things and also leave room for other things." "When did I say that?" Mason asked. "Last year when I wanted to only eat orange food." "That's, not really the same situation." "It's a little the same," Lily said, and went back to her pork chop. Victoria didn't look at Mason, but she heard him make a small sound that might have been him covering a laugh. After dinner, Lily went inside to watch 30 minutes of television before bed, and Victoria and Mason sat on the porch steps with the remains of 2 beers and the neighborhood winding down around them, a couple of fireflies, someone's sprinkler 3 houses over, the sky doing the slow darkening it did in August, lingering too long in the west. "Your sister said you always make enough," Victoria said. "My sister talks too much. She came by to pick up Lily. She spent 45 minutes critiquing my refrigerator." He looked sideways at her. "She does that. She means well." "I know." Victoria picked at the label on her beer. "She was right about the refrigerator." "Yeah?" "There was a yogurt in there that had been dead for 4 days. Mason winced. "That's grim." "It was very grim." She paused. "I haven't been taking care of myself very well." "I know that. I think I'm getting slightly better at it." He didn't say anything for a moment. Down the street, the sprinkler clicked off. "It's easier when someone's watching," he said. "Like, you're more likely to eat an actual meal if someone else is going to eat with you. That's not a judgment. It's just a thing that's true." "Is that why you always have enough?" He turned his beer in his hands. "Dana went through a rough stretch a few years back, after her divorce. I used to make dinner and just call her and say there was extra, come over. She always came." He shrugged. "So yeah, probably where it comes from." Victoria looked at him. That was kind. She would have done the same, he said, dismissing it. She did do the same when Lily's mom left. She basically moved in for 6 months. Your family shows up for each other. Isn't that what family does? She thought about her own family, her mother in Portland, her brother in Seattle, the careful, cordial calls every few weeks, people who loved each other at a precise and comfortable distance. Not always. He looked at her, not with judgment, just acknowledgement. No, he said. Not always. September arrived, and the heat finally broke. It didn't break gracefully. There was a week of weather that couldn't decide what it was. Hot days followed by cold nights followed by a day of rain that smelled like October. But then one morning, Victoria woke up and the air through her bedroom window was genuinely cool, and the quality of the light was different, and summer was over. She'd been in Delwood for almost 4 months. Her assistant had called twice in the last 2 weeks, not with pressure, just with things that needed a decision from her specifically. She'd made the decisions. She'd done 2 video calls with the Columbus team and sat through them feeling like she was watching them from a slight distance, like a person looking at a photograph of a room they used to live in. The company was fine. Her partners were managing well. The thing she'd spent a decade building was humming along without her, which should have been a relief, and was partly a relief, and partly something else she hadn't fully named. She'd stayed 69 days past her initial 30. She sat with that number and tried to figure out what it meant. Whether she was healing or hiding, whether there was a meaningful difference. She'd started running again in the mornings when the air was cool and the streets were mostly empty. Just 2 or 3 miles, nothing serious, but her body remembered how to do it, and there was something clarifying about the simple mechanic of it, feet and breath and pavement, the neighborhood coming alive in pieces around her. She started nodding at people she recognized, started knowing which dogs would bark, and which would just watch from behind their fences with solemn professional interest. One morning she ran past Mason's truck in the driveway and heard him inside, talking to Lily about something, and the sound of it, the ordinary domestic sound of a morning before school, moved through her in a way she didn't examine too closely. She kept running. The thing about Mason Reed that she hadn't expected, hadn't been prepared for really, was that he didn't perform anything. She had spent her adult life in rooms full of people performing things. Confidence, competence, ease, warmth, authority. Even the authenticity was usually performed, carefully calibrated to the audience. She'd learned to read it without thinking about it, the way you learn to read weather. But Mason didn't have any of that. Or if he did, she'd never caught it operating. He said what he thought when he thought it was worth saying, and he didn't say it when it wasn't. He was competent without making a thing of it. When he was tired, he looked tired. When something annoyed him, it showed in his face briefly, and then he moved on. He didn't manage himself for her observation. It was, she realized gradually, one of the most relaxing things about being around him. She told him this badly, one afternoon when they were sitting in his garage while he worked on a neighbor's car that had developed a noise the neighbor couldn't afford to take to the shop. A favor, unpaid, that Mason had offered without being asked, which was its own thing she'd filed away. She'd come over with 2 coffees and ended up staying, sitting on an overturned crate, because she'd been about to start a call she was dreading, and going to Mason's garage was a comprehensible alternative. "You're very hard to be uncomfortable around," she said. He looked up from the engine. "Is that a compliment?" "I think so. I meant it as one." He wiped his hands on a rag and considered it. "I'm too tired to perform anything," he said. "I've got a kid and a job and a half-painted porch. I don't have the bandwidth." "Most people find the bandwidth." "For what?" "Impression management," she said, "seeming like a particular kind of person." He thought about this. "I know what kind of person I am. I don't need other people to agree." Victoria looked at him. "That's either very healthy or very disconnected." "Probably some of both." He went back to the engine. "What's the call you're dreading?" She blinked. "I didn't say I was dreading a call. You looked like someone who needed a reason not to go inside when you walked over here." She was quiet for a moment. "My partners want to discuss my timeline for coming back, which is a reasonable conversation, and I'm not ready for it." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what I want to tell them." He didn't push it. He adjusted something in the engine, checked something else. The garage smelled like oil and concrete, and faintly like the WD-40 hanging on the pegboard wall. "You don't have to know yet," he said eventually. "It's been 4 months. So?" "People expect a timeline." "People expect a lot of things," he said. He straightened up, pushed his hair back from his forehead. "You'll know when you know. Taking the call before you know just means you're going to say something you don't mean." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're annoyingly reasonable." "I've been called worse," he said. She took the call that evening anyway, because she had to. She told her partner she needed 2 more months. She said it without apologizing, which was something Mason had not told her to do, but which she'd somehow arrived at by proximity. They agreed. She closed the laptop and sat in her quiet kitchen and felt, not better exactly, but clearer. Tip. October came with a quality of light that was completely different from any other month. Lower, more amber, making everything look like a painting of itself. Victoria had always liked October in the abstract and had rarely had time to actually live in one. This one she lived in the specific and granular way of someone with days that weren't accounted for. She started spending time in Mason's garage regularly. There was no particular logic to it. She wasn't learning anything technical. She wasn't providing help. She was mostly just there, reading on her phone, or occasionally handing him things when he asked. It was the kind of companionship that didn't need a frame. Lily came home from school and found her there twice, and both times responded as though this were a completely expected development, dropping her backpack in the usual corner and beginning her homework at the workbench Mason had set up for her, narrating to Victoria what she'd learned that day while Victoria nodded at the appropriate intervals. "We learned about igneous rocks," Lily said one afternoon. "How'd that go?" Victoria asked. "They're made from lava, which is incredible." Lily lined up her pencils. "Did you know that some of the rocks in Indiana are really old, like older than dinosaurs?" "I didn't know that." "Most things are older than you think," Lily said, with the gravity of someone who has recently had her world expanded. From under the hood of a Subaru, Mason said, "Where'd you hear that?" "My teacher. She said everything we see used to be something else." Mason said. "Do you think that's true about people?" Lily asked. She was looking at Victoria, not at Mason. Victoria thought about it seriously, the way you think about things when a 7-year-old asks them. "I think people can become something different without stopping to be what they were," she said. Lily considered this. "Like metamorphosis." "Sort of, yeah." "Butterflies don't remember being caterpillars," Lily said. "Nobody knows that for sure." Lily looked surprised by this. "That's true," she said slowly. "Nobody asked them." There was a clank from under the hood, and Mason said, to no one in particular, "This conversation is a lot for a Tuesday afternoon." "You're just jealous because you don't know about metamorphosis," Lily told him. "I know plenty about metamorphosis. Name one thing." "It's what happens when something changes completely and comes out different on the other side." He straightened up and looked at Lily. "Sound familiar?" Lily looked at her pencils. "I didn't change completely. I'm still me." "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly what I mean." Victoria watched this small exchange and felt something she didn't reach for, just let sit. What? The night it got complicated was a Saturday in late October, and neither of them caused it. They'd been sitting on Mason's porch after Lily was in bed, the way they'd been doing more frequently as the weather cooled and they'd traded the porch steps for actual chairs and the beers for coffee because the nights had gotten cold enough. The neighborhood had that still quality of late autumn, everything quieter, everybody inside earlier. The sky was clear and the stars were doing what stars do in rural places, which is to say they were excessive and unashamed about it. They'd been talking about something inconsequential and then weren't talking about anything, and in that silence, Victoria said without planning to, "I went back through some photos today." Mason waited. "Of David. Of us." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I hadn't been able to do that. I tried a few times in the first weeks and I couldn't get past the third picture." "What happened today?" "I got through all of them." She paused. "It took me about 3 hours. I cried through most of it. But I got through them." She looked at the street. It didn't feel like losing him again. It felt like, I don't know, like being with him for a little while. That's the first time it felt like that instead of the other thing. Mason was quiet for a moment. That sounds like something shifting. Yeah, she said. I think it is. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, which was something he did when he was thinking. She'd come to know that gesture the way you come to know someone's particular habits when you've been watching them without meaning to. Can I ask something? He said. Yeah. What was he like? She looked at him, surprised not by the question, but by the fact that no one, not her mother, not her partners, not anyone in the months since, had asked her that. They'd asked how she was doing. They'd asked if she needed anything. Nobody had asked about David specifically, as though asking about him might break something. He was funny, she said. Not in a performing way, just things occurred to him. Connections between unrelated things that were somehow also true. He could make anything seem absurd without being mean about it. She paused. He was terrible at being on time. Not in an inconsiderate way, just time was a thing that happened to other people. He was always doing something that seemed more important than whatever time said he should be doing. She paused again. He made me less serious. I'd completely forgotten what that felt like. Mason was listening, not with the slightly performative attention people sometimes gave, the nodding and the careful expressions, just genuinely listening the way he listened to everything. He sounds like someone worth knowing, he said. He was, she said. Yeah. She turned to look at Mason and found him already looking at her, and the moment had a quality to it that neither of them had engineered, and neither of them rushed to name or diffuse. They just sat in it for a few seconds, and then Mason looked back at the street, and the moment let them go. Thank you for asking about him, she said. You don't have to thank me for that. Most people are afraid to. He shrugged. People who mattered to someone shouldn't disappear just because they're gone. She looked at the side of his face, the tiredness in it that lived there permanently, the particular set of a jaw belonging to someone who had learned to carry weight without complaint. She thought about what his sister had said. He's had a hard few years. She thought about a man who cooked enough dinner for someone who might need it and called it nothing. Mason, she said. He looked at her. What happened to you before Delwood? He was quiet for a moment. A lot of small things stacked on top of each other, he said. That's usually how it goes. That's not really an answer. No, he agreed. He looked back at the street. I was an engineer, studied it at Purdue on scholarship, graduated, got a job at a firm in Indianapolis, was doing fine. He paused. Then Lily happened. Then her mother happened. Or didn't happen, depending on how you look at it. Then I got laid off. Then I was a single father with an engineering degree and a baby and no job, and the engineering market was having a moment, and I needed income that was immediate, and I knew how to fix engines from working summers at my uncle's shop. So you became a mechanic. So I became a mechanic. He said it without bitterness, just fact. It's not what I planned, but I'm good at it, and it pays, and the hours are workable with Lily's schedule. And then 3 months ago, I needed a fresh start, and my sister is here, so we moved. Do you miss engineering? He thought about it. Actually thought about it rather than deflecting. Sometimes I miss thinking about certain problems. I miss the feeling of solving something that required that specific kind of thinking. He looked at his hands. But being Lily's dad is also, it's not a consolation prize. It's the thing. Does that make sense? Yeah, she said. It does. I just mean, I don't want to frame it as something I settled for. It's what I chose. Every day it's what I choose. Even on the hard days? Especially on the hard days. He said it simply, and she believed it completely. The night had gotten colder. Across the street, a single window went dark. One by one, the neighbors were going to sleep. I was thinking, Victoria said, about staying past December. She hadn't told anyone this yet. She wasn't sure she'd fully told herself. Yeah, Mason said. I don't know what that looks like. Professionally, I'd have to restructure some things. She paused. I'd have to figure out what I actually want, which is the harder problem. What do you want? He asked. Straightforward, no pressure in it. She thought about it for longer than was comfortable. I want to stop dreading my own life, she said finally. I want to get to a point where I wake up and it doesn't feel like climbing out of something. She paused. I think I'm getting there. I don't want to leave before I get there. He nodded. Sounds like a good reason to stay. And Lily is very attached to me, she said, and heard the tone shift slightly, lighter, which was deliberate. She absolutely is, Mason said. She told me my hair looks like a scientist's hair. That's a compliment from her. I know, I'm keeping it. He smiled, an actual full smile, which he deployed infrequently enough that Victoria had started noticing each one. It changed his face into something that looked considerably less tired. She looked at him. He looked at her. This is good, she said. Whatever this is, it's good. Yeah, he said. It is. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The stars did their excessive rural thing above Clover Mill Road, and two broken people sat in the cold on a porch and chose, without saying so, not to move yet. She stayed. She didn't make a formal announcement about it. She didn't send a memo to her partners or update her calendar or call her mother with a definitive statement. She just kept waking up in the house on Clover Mill Road and not leaving, and eventually that fact accumulated enough weight that it became simply true. Victoria Sinclair lived in Delwood, Indiana. For now. For the foreseeable now. Her assistant, whose name was Priya and who had been running the operational layer of Victoria's life for 6 years with the calm efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything Victoria did, processed this information with characteristic neutrality and began routing accordingly. Calls were scheduled around Central Time. Documents were sent digitally. The Columbus office continued to function, and Victoria continued to have opinions about how it functioned, and the distance turned out to matter less than she'd feared. What she hadn't expected was how much work she could do from a kitchen table in a quiet house on a street where nobody knew what Sinclair Capital was. She'd built the company on the premise that proximity mattered, that you had to be in the room, had to feel the air of a negotiation, had to read the table. And that was still true for some things. But she'd been in rooms for a decade, and she was only now sitting at a kitchen table in Indiana with a cold cup of coffee and a view of Mason's truck in his driveway, beginning to think about what she actually wanted to build and why. It was a question she'd never had time to ask. She was finding the asking uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. November came. The trees dropped the last of what they had, and the street took on the bare, honest look of late autumn. All bone and sky, nothing to hide behind. Victoria started wearing Mason's old flannel jacket around the house, a thing that had been left on her porch railing after a particularly cold evening and that she had not returned because she kept forgetting, and also because it was warm and she had not brought enough warm things to Indiana. Mason had not asked for it back. She suspected he noticed and was choosing not to comment, which was a very Mason thing to do. Lily had started calling her Vicky, which Victoria had never in her adult life allowed anyone to call her, and somehow didn't correct. The first complication arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a phone call from a name she hadn't expected to see on her screen. She was standing in the kitchen in the flannel jacket making coffee when her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it and went completely still. Renata Hartley, David's mother. She let it ring twice, 3 times. Her hand went to the phone and then didn't pick it up. On the 4th ring, she answered because not answering felt worse. Victoria. Renata's voice was the same as always, the precise diction, the controlled warmth that was real warmth even if it was controlled. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. No, Victoria said and cleared her throat. No, this is fine. How are you? Managing, Renata said, which was the honest version. She'd lost a son. You didn't get past that. You managed. I've been thinking about you. I've been thinking about you too. It was true. She thought about the Hartleys periodically with a specific complicated feeling, the sense that she was tethered to them by grief, and also that the tether was getting longer, which felt like a betrayal she was trying not to examine. I heard through the grapevine that you're not in Columbus, Renata said. I took some time, Victoria said. I'm in Indiana for a while. Good, Renata said simply. You needed time. You weren't taking any. A pause. Victoria looked out the window at the bare yard, the gray sky. I'm doing better, she said. I want you to know that. I'm doing better. I'm glad. A brief silence. Victoria, I'm calling because we're finally going through David's things. His apartment. We've been putting it off, but we can't keep paying the lease. A pause. There are some things that were yours. I wanted to ask before we made any decisions. Of course, Victoria said. I'll come. She hadn't planned to say that. It came out of her mouth with the automatic quality of the right answer, and she sat with it for a moment after the words landed. You don't have to, Renata said. I know. I want to. She paused. I think I need to. They set a date for the following weekend. After the call, Victoria stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching nothing in particular, the coffee going cold behind her. She told Mason that evening, walking down to his place with no particular reason except that she needed to say it out loud to someone, and he was the person she wanted to say things to. He was in the garage, doing something to the Subaru that was apparently a recurring situation, and she sat on the overturned crate and told him about the call. He listened without interrupting, which she'd come to rely on. Do you want to go? He asked when she was done. I think I have to, but yes. She paused. I haven't been back to Columbus since I left. I haven't gone to the apartment. His apartment. He was going to move in with me, she said. After the wedding, we'd already picked out furniture. She stopped. There are books there. Things I lent him that he didn't give back. He was terrible about returning things. What do you do when you get there? I don't know. Help them sort things. Take what's mine. Say whatever there is to say. She looked at her hands. Renata she was always kind to me. I don't want her to feel like I've disappeared on her. Have you? It was a direct question. She felt it land. A little, she said honestly. I didn't mean to. I've been trying to get through my own part of it. He nodded. She'd probably understand that. Understanding it and it not hurting are different things. Yeah, he said. They are. She looked at him. You've thought about this. My mom died when I was 23, he said. Not the same thing, but the way grief radiates out to everyone who knew the person, everyone handling it alone even when they're all in the same room. Yeah. He reached for a wrench. I've thought about it. She'd known this about him. Dana had mentioned it once, offhand, but he'd never said it directly. She let it sit without making too much of it. I'm going Saturday, she said. Coming back Sunday. He nodded. Will you keep an eye on the house? He looked at her. It's a house. It doesn't need watching. I know, She stopped. She'd been about to say something that would have meant, I want someone to know I'm gone and to notice when I come back. She didn't say it. He looked at her for a second with the particular quality he had of understanding the sentence that wasn't said. Yeah, he said, I'll keep an eye. Columbus was grayer than she'd left it, which was probably projection. The skyline looked the same, the roads looked the same. Everything looked exactly like the city she'd lived in for 8 years, which was both reassuring and destabilizing. This place that had held her entire adult life, looking completely indifferent to what had happened. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a brick building on the Near East Side. She'd been here hundreds of times. She knew which step on the staircase squeaked and that the 3rd floor hallway smelled like whoever lived there was always making soup. She stood outside the door with Renata and Renata's older sister Patricia, and she did not hesitate, which she considered a personal victory. Renata had a key. She turned it and the door opened and the smell of the apartment hit Victoria. A specific combination of old paperbacks and the particular soap David used and something underneath that she couldn't name but was just him, was just the accumulated presence of him in the space. And she breathed through it with the deliberateness of someone managing altitude. Take your time, Renata said, and touched her arm briefly. She took her time. She'd been afraid it would flatten her, that she'd walk in and be back at the beginning, back in the raw first days when grief was a physical thing you moved through rather than carried. But it wasn't like that. It was heavy, but it was a manageable heavy, the weight of something she was strong enough to hold. She moved through the apartment, his books. She found 3 of hers, right where she would have left them if they'd been hers, spine out on the 2nd shelf, titles she could see, a novel she'd read twice and pressed on him, a biography of a jazz musician she'd bought him for his birthday, a book about cartography he'd borrowed and then hidden the fact that he hadn't returned because he wasn't finished with it. She took those. She found a scarf she'd forgotten she owned. She found in the kitchen the coffee mug she'd given him the first Christmas they were together, the one with the terrible design she'd thought was funny, and she held it for a long time before putting it in the bag. She sat at his kitchen table. She sat there long enough that Patricia came in to ask if she needed anything, and she said no, and Patricia left, and she sat a while longer. She thought about what she'd told Mason on the porch. People who mattered to someone shouldn't disappear just because they're gone. She'd received that from him. Now she was trying to do it, to be in the room where David had been and let him be real in it rather than pressing the reality down. He'd made her coffee at this table. He'd read the news and complained about it with such specific and energetic outrage that she'd laughed even when she agreed with him. He'd proposed at this table, unplanned, with no ring because the ring was on order and he'd meant to wait but hadn't been able to, sliding the coffee toward her and saying, "I need you to say yes to something before the coffee gets cold. And the answer is, will you please marry me because I've been thinking about it for months and I can't figure out why I'm waiting." She'd said yes before her hand reached the coffee. She sat at the table and let all of it be real, and it hurt. And it wasn't only pain. And after a while, she stood up and went to find Renata. She drove back to Delwood on Sunday afternoon. The 2.5-hour drive felt different going back than it had going out. The direction mattered, apparently, the fact that she was heading toward something now rather than just away. She pulled onto Clover Mill Road in the early evening and saw Mason's truck in the driveway, and the lights on in his kitchen, and the sight of it did something specific to her chest that she noted and set aside. She parked. She sat in the car for a minute. Then she got out and went to his door and knocked. He opened it and read her face and said, "Come in, I just made dinner." "I'm not hungry," she said. "Doesn't matter," he said, and held the door. She sat at his kitchen table and he put a plate in front of her anyway and she ate most of it, which apparently she'd needed, and Lily came out of her room briefly in pajamas to inform Victoria that there was a new star she wanted to show her, and then was sent back to bed by Mason with the promise that the star would still be there tomorrow. "How was it?" he asked, when it was just the two of them. She turned her fork against the plate. "Sad and okay," she said. "Both at once." "That tracks," he said. "I sat at his kitchen table for a long time." She paused. "I remembered some things I'd been remembering him around the edges, like I was afraid to look directly at any of it. But I looked at some of it this weekend, the actual specific things, and it was, I don't know, it made him more real instead of less." "That makes sense. Does it? When my mom died, I kept trying to be careful around the memories, like they'd break if I used them." He put his own fork down. "Dana was the one who told me to just tell the stories. Out loud. Just say them. It felt counterintuitive, and it helped." "What was she like?" He looked at her, and she recognized the quality of the question because he'd asked it about David, the direct humanizing thing nobody ever thought to ask. "Impatient," he said, and his tone carried something warm. Everything moved too slow for her. She'd be halfway through a sentence before she figured out if she actually wanted to say it. She burned things because she never wanted to wait for them to heat up slow. He paused. She smelled like lavender and motor oil because she used lavender soap and then helped my uncle in his shop every weekend. Completely contradictory. He looked at the table. "She thought I took everything too seriously." "Did you?" "Probably. I was 17 and thought the stakes were higher than they were on every single thing." He half smiled. She'd have found Lily hilarious. Lily has her exact thing about time. The scheduling thing? The complete disregard for anyone else's schedule. Yes. He picked his fork back up. She would have loved Lily completely. "Lily would have loved her back," Victoria said. He looked at her. "I mean it," she said. "Lily doesn't give her attention to people who don't earn it. I've noticed." He was quiet for a moment. "She takes people seriously," he said. "She doesn't have the skepticism yet. He stopped. "The wall," Victoria said. "Yeah." "She'll develop it, probably." "Probably," he agreed. "I'm hoping not for a while." Victoria looked at him. The slight downward pull at the corner of his mouth when he thought about Lily encountering the harder edges of things. The thing he was already bracing for years out, because that was the nature of loving someone small and unable to protect themselves yet. She understood that particular quality of preemptive ache, different from her own grief but recognizable in structure. She didn't say anything. She helped him clear the plates because that was what you did, and the kitchen was quiet except for the water and the ordinary sounds of the house settling at night. The storm arrived 2 weeks later, on a Thursday in the last days of November, without much warning. There had been a forecast. The weather apps had been muttering about it for 3 days, but the forecast said rain and wind, and what arrived was something considerably more organized and intentional than that. It came in from the northwest at just past 7 in the evening, and within an hour the neighborhood looked like a different place. Branches down, gutters overwhelmed. The power flickered twice, and on the third flicker it gave up entirely, and the street went dark. Victoria was on a call when the power died. She found her phone flashlight, apologized to the Columbus team, said they'd pick it up tomorrow, and sat in her dark house listening to the storm do what it was doing. Rain hitting the windows in sheets, a constant roar underneath it, and then a sound she'd never heard before, a grinding, tearing sound from the direction of Mason's house. She looked out the window and couldn't see much in the dark except the shape of things. She grabbed her jacket, the flannel one, automatically, because it was closest, and her phone and went to the door. The rain hit her immediately and completely. There was no easing into it. She got across the yard between their houses in under a minute, and it might as well have been 5. She could hear the sound more clearly now. Something structural, something under strain. And she could see in the sweep of her phone flashlight that the side wall of Mason's detached garage was moving, visibly, in the wind. The siding on the east wall had partially torn free, and the whole structure was making a sound like it was deciding something. Mason came out of the back door as she reached the garage. He was already in his jacket and had a flashlight of his own. He looked at the garage and then at her, briefly, and she could see in the wet light that he was calculating. "The back anchor post is loose," he said. He had to raise his voice. "If that wall goes, the roof follows." "What do you need?" He looked at her. "What do you need?" she said again. "In the garage, left side wall, there's a strap ratchet on the second shelf. Orange handle." He was already moving. "Lily's in the house?" "I don't know. I came from my house." "She's in the house," he said more to himself. "Go in and stay with her." "Tell me what to do with the strap ratchet." "Victoria, I'm not going to stand in your kitchen while you're out here alone. Tell me what to do." He looked at her for half a second in the rain, and apparently decided this was not a negotiation with a good outcome for him. "Get the strap. Bring it here." She found the strap in the dark, by feel, which took longer than it should have and produced a bruised shin from a toolbox she didn't see. She brought it back. He'd found the anchor post. She didn't understand the engineering of what he was doing, but she understood the practical reality when he handed her one end of the strap and said, "Hold this. Brace against the wall. Don't let it slip." And she held it with both hands and braced her feet against the wet concrete and held. He worked fast. She could hear him more than see him, moving around the structure, the ratchet clicking in quick sequences, the walls groaning, gradually becoming less active. Her arms were burning by the time he said, "Okay," and came back to where she was. She let go. The wall held. They stood there for a moment in the rain, which wasn't any lighter than before, and looked at the garage. "Will it stay?" she asked. "Tonight. I'll need to do a proper repair tomorrow." He looked at her. She was soaked completely, her hair plastered flat and water running off her nose. He was equally soaked. "You're going to get sick." "I'm not going to get sick." "You're going to get sick," he said, and touched her elbow briefly, and they moved toward the house. Lily was in the kitchen with 2 flashlights and a candle she'd found and lit herself, sitting at the kitchen table with a book and an expression of profound calm. She looked up when they came in dripping and said, "I could hear the storm from my room, so I came down. There are towels in the cabinet above the dryer." "You're 7, Mason said. 7.5, Lily said. "The towels are in the cabinet." They got towels. Victoria stood in Mason's kitchen in a borrowed sweatshirt, her own soaked clothes in a wet pile, and the 3 of them sat at the table while the storm ran itself out outside. Lily had made hot chocolate, which had involved finding the camping stove Mason kept for power outages, and which she'd operated with an accuracy that Mason found alarming and she found completely reasonable. You use the camping stove, Mason said. I've watched you do it. You're not supposed to use it without me here. You weren't here. Victoria was next door. Victoria was outside in the storm, Lily said logically, so I made hot chocolate. Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Mason. Neither of them said anything. It's good hot chocolate, Victoria offered. Thank you, Lily said, satisfied. The power came back at 9:30, which was a surprise. Half the neighborhood apparently stayed dark, but Clover Mill Road got lucky. The lights came on and Lily said finally, with the exasperation of someone who'd been very patient for a very long time, and then Mason sent her to bed. And she went without major protest after extracting a promise that Victoria would stay to check the stars she'd been waiting to show her, which could not be seen tonight due to clouds, but which would be visible tomorrow. Victoria promised. Lily went to bed. The house settled into the particular quiet of after the storm, after the crisis, after the child was in bed. Mason made actual coffee because there was now power for it, and they sat at the table that had held so many evenings by now that Victoria had stopped thinking of it as his kitchen table and had started thinking of it just as the table. She was still in his sweatshirt. It said Purdue Engineering across the front in faded letters. She'd noticed and not said anything. You should have gone inside, he said. Not with any real force, just saying it. You would have been out there alone. I do things alone all the time. I know, she said. You don't have to. He looked at her. She hadn't meant it to carry as much weight as it did when it landed. It was a simple sentence, and she'd meant it as a simple sentence, but the quiet in the room gave it room to expand. I know, he said. His voice was different. Not softer exactly, just more careful. The kitchen clock ticked. Rain still moved against the windows, lighter now, the storm past its height. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. She looked at the table and then at him. When I first moved here, I thought I was coming to disappear for a little while. I thought it would be... She stopped. I thought I'd put myself somewhere quiet until I could figure out how to go back to my life. Like it was a parenthesis. She paused. I don't think of it that way anymore. He was looking at her steadily. I don't know what it is instead, she said. I'm not trying to say something I can't back up. She stopped again. The sentence wasn't finishing itself cleanly, and she let it go unfinished. I know what you're saying, he said. Yeah? Yeah. He turned his coffee cup. I've been careful about this, because I'm not good at things I can't follow through on. And I didn't know what you were in the middle of, whether you were heading back to your life or building a new one here, and it didn't seem right to... He stopped too. They were both stopped in the same place, which was something. I'm building a new one, she said. I think that's what I'm doing. He looked at her for a long moment, and she held the look because looking away felt wrong. Okay, he said, and then, because he was Mason and he didn't perform, I'm glad you held the strap. She laughed. Actually laughed, sudden and unguarded, and he smiled at the sound of it, the full smile, the one that changed his face. And they sat there in his kitchen while the rain finished and the neighborhood outside was dark and quiet, and something between them that had been cautious for 5 months took a breath and became something it had been becoming for a while. She didn't go home until midnight. Nothing happened except that they talked and then sat without talking, and once his arm was along the back of the couch, and she was close enough that she could have moved toward it and didn't yet. And when she finally said she should go, he walked her to the door. And they stood there for a moment in the threshold between the inside and the outside air, and he said, "Be careful going across the yard," which was 30 feet of flat grass, and she said, "I think I can manage it," and they looked at each other in the doorway, and she went home. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. She was wearing the flannel jacket again, over the borrowed sweatshirt, which was a thing she didn't examine too carefully, and outside the storm had fully passed, and the night was clean and cold. And she thought about what she'd said. I'm building a new one, and felt the truth of it settle in her like something finally laid down after a long carry. Something was cracking open, not breaking, just opening. The way ground opens in the first weeks of spring, along the seams it always had, into something that had been there all along, waiting for the temperature to change. She was terrified of it. She was not going to stop. The sweatshirt sat on her dresser for 3 days. She kept meaning to return it and kept finding reasons not to. It wasn't avoidance exactly. She saw Mason every day. They had dinner twice that week. She stood in his garage on Friday afternoon while he worked, and they talked about nothing consequential. She just hadn't returned the sweatshirt, and he hadn't asked about it, and the not asking felt like its own kind of conversation. On the 4th day, she put it back on because it was cold and she was alone in the house, and she was tired of thinking about what it meant. The days after the storm had a different quality than the days before it. Not dramatically different. Nothing had been declared, nothing formally shifted. But the air between them had changed in the specific way air changes after a front comes through. Clearer, less pressure. She was aware of him differently, which she'd been aware of for a while, but was now no longer pretending she wasn't. He looked at her differently too, though if she'd tried to describe exactly how she couldn't have, except to say that his attention had always been complete, and now it was also something else. They were careful with each other, but it was a different kind of careful than before. Before had been the careful of two people who didn't fully trust the ground. This was the careful of people who trusted it and knew it mattered. Lily noticed because Lily noticed everything and mentioned it to Victoria on a Sunday afternoon while they were raking leaves in the backyard, a project Lily had proposed and executed with the strategic intensity she brought to most things, assigning sections, establishing pile locations, issuing corrections when Victoria's technique was insufficiently thorough. "You're different lately," Lily said, dragging her rake in a line Victoria had already covered. "Different how?" "You smile more." Lily considered this, pushing leaves into the pile. "When you're around Dad, mostly," Victoria kept raking, "people smile." "You didn't used to smile that much," Lily said, simply and without cruelty. "When you first moved here, you looked like someone who was thinking about something sad all the time." "I was," Victoria said. "And now?" "Now I'm thinking about raking leaves." Lily looked at her sideways with an expression that was uncomfortably perceptive for someone whose front teeth were still coming in. "That's not the only thing," she said, and went back to her section. Victoria didn't say anything. She raked a section she'd already raked, and the leaves came up clean, and somewhere in the house Mason was fixing the kitchen faucet that had been dripping for a week. And the sound of him working in there was a sound she'd come to know, the way you come to know sounds that belong in the background of your days. The business idea had been there for a while before either of them said it out loud. It had come up sideways in several conversations. Mason mentioning a car he'd turned down because Halsey's shop wasn't set up for it. A specialty job he'd had to refer out because the equipment didn't exist locally. He talked about his work with the precise, matter-of-fact competence of someone who had long ago stopped comparing the job he had to the job he'd planned on. But occasionally, in gaps between sentences, she caught something else. A frustration that was too specific and too directed to be general unhappiness. The frustration of a person with an idea they haven't had time to look at directly. She didn't push it. She waited. He said it himself on a Wednesday evening in early December, standing in her kitchen because they'd taken to rotating, her kitchen, his kitchen, depending on who started the coffee, looking at something on his laptop, and he turned it to show her without explanation. It was a commercial listing. A building on the east side of town, former auto parts distributor, 12,000 square feet, been sitting empty for 2 years. The price was listed. It was low, in the way prices are low for buildings that need significant work. She looked at the listing, then at him. "I've been driving past it for 3 months," he said. "When did you start looking at the listing?" "About 6 weeks ago." He turned the laptop back. "It's just an idea. I know the numbers are complicated." "Tell me the idea." He stood there for a second, the way people stand when they're deciding how seriously to take their own thing. Then he sat down across from her at the table and told her. A full-service independent shop. Not just mechanical work, full diagnostic capability, specialty work, the kind of restorations he currently had to turn away. A proper alignment rack. Space for 2 or 3 other mechanics, people he already knew and trusted. A waiting area that wasn't depressing. The east side had nothing like it. The nearest shop with real capability was 35 minutes away in Bloomington. He laid it out with an engineer's logic and a mechanic's practical knowledge. The two things running parallel in him in a way she found herself watching with real attention. He'd thought about the startup costs, about the hiring, about the clientele base. He'd done the math without apparently showing it to anyone, carrying it by himself for months the way he carried most things. When he was done, he sat back and looked at his coffee. "That's a real business," she said. "I know it is. I mean, the structure is sound. The market gap is real. You've done the analysis." He looked at her. "I know the numbers. I also know what the numbers don't cover. Capital." "Yeah." He turned his coffee cup. "I've got some savings. Not enough for a building and equipment and first-year operating costs. Not by a distance." She looked at him. She knew, and he knew she knew, that the capital problem was not a problem she couldn't solve. That was the shape of the room they were sitting in, the thing they were both aware of and neither had addressed. "I'm not asking you for money," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you're not." "I'm showing you the idea because you're—" He stopped. "Because I wanted to show you, not because I need a solution." She looked at him for a moment. "What do you need?" He thought about it. "I don't know, someone to tell me if the idea is stupid." "It's not stupid." "Or if I'm being impractical." "You're not being impractical. Your cost projections are conservative, which means they're honest, which means they're probably close to real." She paused. "The idea is sound, Mason. The execution is fundable. What you're missing is someone who can structure the financing." He was quiet. "That's not an offer," she said. "I'm just naming what the gap is." "I know," he said. They sat with that for a while. She didn't push it toward a conclusion, and she appreciated, not for the first time, that he didn't either. "Okay, what cracked things open, in the end, wasn't the money conversation, it was the other one." She'd been on a video call with Priya the following Monday morning when Priya had said, with the careful neutrality she used when she was saying something she'd been thinking for a while, "The board is asking about your timeline for relocating back to Columbus." Victoria had been looking at a spreadsheet on her other monitor. She stopped looking at it. "What did you tell them?" "I said I'd ask you." Priya paused. "Victoria, it's been 5 months." "I know how long it's been." "They're not pushing, they're asking." Another pause. "Some of them are confused. You've been running the company remotely without any real problems, which I think proves your point that presence isn't always essential. But there are things that would be easier if you were—" "I'll think about it," Victoria said. After the call, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time without doing anything on it. The street outside was gray and cold, December settling in properly now. She could see the light on in Mason's garage from here. She hadn't thought about leaving in weeks. She'd been so thoroughly in the present tense of Delwood, the street, the house, Lily, the kitchen table conversations, the flannel jacket that was technically still borrowed, that the question of going back had been sitting in a back room she'd been careful not to open. She opened it now. What she found there was more complex than she'd expected. She had a company, a real one, with real people whose livelihoods depended on leadership that was present and committed. She had partners who had been patient and professional and who were entitled, after 5 months, to something more than remote calls and deferred timelines. She had a life that existed in Columbus, not a life she missed exactly, but a life that was hers and that was sitting there waiting to know what she intended. And she had this, whatever this was: a house on a street in Indiana, a man in a garage 4 houses down, a 7-year-old who called her Vicky and had assigned her a permanent position as telescope operator. She could not keep both of these things in a holding pattern forever. She knew that. She'd known it for weeks and been choosing, without admitting she was choosing, not to think about it. She walked to Mason's garage that afternoon without a particular plan. He was there. He looked at her face and said, "What's wrong?" Not as a question. "Nothing's wrong," she said. "I need to think out loud." "Okay." She sat on the crate. She told him about the call. She told him what the board wanted, what her partners needed, what she'd been avoiding. He listened without moving around, which was something he did when he understood she needed his full attention rather than his half attention while he worked. "What do you want to do?" he asked when she was done. "I don't know." "You know," he said, "you're not sure you want to say it." She looked at him. He was right, which was irritating. "I don't want to go back to Columbus and be who I was there," she said. "I want to go back if I go back as someone different, someone who actually—" She stopped. I built the company out of momentum and avoidance. I was always running toward the next thing because the next thing was better than stopping and feeling whatever was behind me. She paused. I don't want to do that anymore. So don't. It's not that simple. There are people who depend on me making certain decisions. I know, he said. But there's a difference between going back to run the company and going back to run away from something. He paused. One of those is a reason. The other is what you've been doing for 10 years. She sat with that. It was a hard thing to be told, and it was true, and she appreciated that he'd said it and resented it slightly, which was the appropriate response. What about Delwood? She said. She was looking at the floor of the garage. What about it? She looked up. What about this? She didn't gesture, but the word held everything. He was quiet for a moment. The garage was cold enough that she could see his breath. That's a different conversation, he said. I know. I'm saying I want to have it. He looked at her with the unhurried quality he had, not avoiding the moment, just taking it in. Yeah, he said. We should have it. Not today, she said. I need to... She shook her head. I need to get clear on my own part first. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. It should have felt incomplete. It didn't. The conversation she hadn't expected came on a Saturday. It was Donna who called, which was not unusual. She and Victoria had developed their own rhythm of communication, mostly texts and occasional calls, the relationship of two people who'd arrived at affection through proximity and stayed because it turned out to be real. But this call had a different quality from the first word. I need to tell you something, Dana said, and I need you to hear it as information, not as me telling you what to do. That's a concerning opening. Mason had a meeting yesterday with a guy named Garrett Phelps. A pause. Phelps runs a body shop chain out of Bloomington. 3 locations. He's been trying to get Mason to come on as a managing mechanic for about 4 months. Victoria was quiet. The offer is good, Dana said. Health insurance, salary, management track. It's a real offer. He's been sitting on it because... Dana stopped. He hasn't told you about it. No, Victoria said. I'm telling you because I don't think he's going to. He's going to decide without telling you, because that's what he does. He decides things by himself because he's spent 4 years not having anyone to decide them with. Dana's voice had an edge that wasn't anger, just concern sharpened by familiarity. And if he takes that job, he's never opening that shop. Victoria stood at her kitchen window. Why would he take it? Because it's safe, and he doesn't take risks he can't afford to take. A pause. He can afford to now, I think, but he doesn't know how to let someone in on that. Dana, I know I'm overstepping. You are. A little. Victoria paused. But thank you. She hung up and stood at the window for a long time. The Phelps offer. She turned it over. She understood why he hadn't told her, understood it in the specific way you understand something about a person when you've been watching them for 5 months, the architecture of their reluctance. He didn't ask for things. He didn't present his problems to people and wait to be helped. He managed his own weight and declined to add it to anyone else's, which was admirable, and also, right now, in the particular context of the thing growing between them, an obstacle. She needed to say something. She didn't know how to say it without making him feel ambushed. She thought about it for 2 hours. Then she went over. He was in the kitchen when she knocked. The door was open because it was always open, and she came in and Lily looked up from the table and said, "Hi, Vicky," without surprise and went back to her book. And Mason looked at Victoria's face and said, "You talked to Dana." "Yes," she said. "She shouldn't have." "She loves you," Victoria said. "Can we talk?" He looked at Lily. "Hey, Bug, go read in your room for a little while?" Lily picked up her book without protest, which meant she understood something was happening. She paused at the hall door and looked at Victoria with the specific look of a child checking that everything is okay, and Victoria gave her a small nod, and Lily went. Mason stood at the counter with his hands flat on it, looking at the window. "The Phelps offer," she said. "It's a good offer." "I know. It's stable. It's income I can count on. Lily's got dental starting in January if I take it, and I've been putting off her orthodontist consult for 8 months because… He stopped. It's a real offer. I know it is, she said. Mason, look at me. He turned. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen clock, the refrigerator running, all the quiet of a house where someone was trying to answer something honestly. Because I didn't want it to become a conversation where you offer to solve my problem, he said. Because the minute I tell you I need capital for the shop, you have it, and then what? He looked at the floor. And then I don't know what we are anymore. She stood there. What do you mean? I mean… He pushed off the counter, moved to the table, pulled out a chair but didn't sit, stood behind it with his hands on the back. I grew up not having things. I worked for everything. I am proud of what I've built, which is not a lot by most measures, but it's mine and I know what it cost. He paused. You have $2 billion. 2.3, she said, which was a reflexive correction she regretted immediately. He looked at her. Sorry, she said. That was $2.3 billion, he said, and I'm a mechanic in Delwood, Indiana with a 6-year-old and a truck with a bad alternator. He said it without self-pity, but he also said it like a fact he was putting on the table to be looked at. I don't know how to… He stopped. I don't want to be someone you're helping. I don't want to be a project. She sat down at the table. She sat down because standing felt too much like a confrontation, and this wasn't that. Look at me, she said again, quieter. He sat. He looked at her. Do you actually believe that's what I think of you? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Because if that's what you think I'm doing here… She stopped, breathed. You are the least project-like person I have ever met. You are the opposite of a project. She paused. I'm not offering to fix your life. I'm not sitting here thinking about what I can provide. I'm here because you are… She stopped again. Say it, he said, and his voice was different. Because you are the reason I stopped dreading my own days, she said. That's it. That's the whole thing. She looked at the table, then back at him. And I would like to be someone you tell things to, not because I'm going to solve them, just because that's what this is, if it's something. He was looking at her. Is it something? She asked. Yeah, he said. It came out rough, like it had been waiting to. Then tell me things, she said. Including this. He sat with that. Outside, a car went past, the first one in a while. Lily's room was quiet above them. The shop is the right idea, she said more gently. You know it is. I know. The capital structure can be set up so that you're the owner, sole owner. Any investment I make is a loan with market rate interest. You pay it back. It's yours. There's no… She stopped. I'm not talking about giving you something. I'm talking about a structure where you build something that belongs to you. That's still you solving the problem. That's capital markets, Mason. That's how things get built. She paused. Would you refuse a bank loan because the bank was solving your problem? He looked at her for a moment. That's different. Is it? He didn't answer, which meant he was working through it honestly rather than defending a position. I'm not trying to diminish what you carry, she said. The independence. I understand why it matters. I understand what it costs to need something from someone. She paused. But there is a version of not needing anything that is just loneliness with good posture. He looked at her sharply. I know it well, she said. I had it for a long time. Something moved in his face. Not breaking, just shifting. The particular movement of someone who has been very composed for a very long time and is considering, maybe, setting a small piece of it down. I'll think about it, he said. The loan structure. That's all I'm asking. And He stopped. I should have told you about Phelps. Yeah, she said. You should have. I'm sorry. I know. She looked at him. Don't do it again. Something brief and real passed across his face. Okay, he said. She stayed for dinner, which had not been planned but was the natural continuation of the evening, and Lily came down from her room and read aloud to both of them from a book about deep-sea creatures with a narration style that was enthusiastic and completely uninterested in pace. And at some point, Victoria found herself laughing at something Lily was explaining about the anglerfish. and she felt Mason watching her laugh. And she didn't look away from Lily, but she felt it, warm and specific, and not frightening. She drove to the lake on a Sunday in the second week of December. It was something she'd been thinking about since Columbus, since sitting at David's kitchen table, since the night of the storm and everything that had shifted in its aftermath. She needed to go alone, without explaining it, and she went. Clearwater Lake was 30 minutes from Delwood, a reservoir that went still and glass flat in winter. She'd found it on a map weeks ago and not gone and kept meaning to. She parked at the empty boat launch and walked down to the water. It was cold enough that her breath came out visible and her ears started to ache after a few minutes, and she stood at the edge of the water and looked at it for a long time. The surface was almost perfectly still. The trees on the far bank had given up everything and stood bare and precise against the gray sky. She thought about David. She thought about him completely and directly, the way she'd started to be able to in the last month. Not around the edges, but head on. The specific person he was, the laugh, and the impatience with time, and the terrible old flip-flops, and the way he'd proposed with the coffee going cold. She held all of it and let herself feel what she felt about it, which was grief and love and gratitude mixed together into something that didn't have a clean name. She stayed at the lake for almost an hour. When she walked back to the car, she felt different, not resolved. Grief doesn't resolve. She understood that now. It just changes shape, becomes something you carry differently as your strength changes. But she felt like she'd said something she needed to say, even without saying it out loud, like she'd visited somewhere and paid her respects and been honest about it. She sat in the car and called Mason. He picked up on the second ring. She could hear the garage sounds behind him. "I'm at Clearwater Lake," she said. A pause. "By yourself?" "Yes. I needed to do something." A pause. "I wanted to tell you I did it." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him understanding what she meant without her spelling it out, which was something he was good at. "How was it?" he asked. "Cold," she said, "and good." She paused. "I think I've been carrying something in a way it was the only way I knew how to carry it, and I think I'm learning a different way." She looked at the gray water through the windshield. "I wanted you to know." "I'm glad you told me," he said. "I'm going to drive back," she said. "Are you around tonight?" "Yeah," he said. "Come over when you get back." She drove back to Delwood with the heater running and the radio off, and the afternoon light was doing the low amber thing of December, making the flat Indiana fields look like something worth looking at. And she thought about the lake and David and the company waiting in Columbus and the man in the garage and the 7-year-old who had assigned her a telescope, and she thought, "I am here. Right now, I am here." It wasn't a small thing. She kissed him that night. Or he kissed her. It was genuinely unclear who moved first, which she thought afterward was the right way for it to happen. Neither of them leaning, both of them arriving at the same point from their own directions. They were on the porch. Lily was in bed. The night was cold enough that they'd brought out blankets, which was something they'd started doing in late November, and which Victoria found she looked forward to with a specificity that told her something. They'd been talking and then not talking, and the not talking had the quality it sometimes had where the space between them felt charged in a way that was no longer deniable. She'd turned to say something. She couldn't remember afterward what it was going to be. And he was looking at her, and there was a moment where they both understood what was about to happen, and neither of them stopped it. It was not like the movies. He had cold hands from the porch air, and she was slightly tangled in her blanket, and the angle was a little awkward for approximately 2 seconds before it wasn't. It was real and slightly imperfect and completely true. And when it ended, she was looking at him and he was looking at her, and there was nothing she needed to say to fill the space. "Hi," she said, which was inadequate and the right thing. "Hi," he said. She laughed, just a small one, and he made a sound that was almost a laugh too. And the night air moved, and somewhere down the street a dog barked at something, and Clover Mill Road was completely ordinary around them, indifferent to the fact that something had just become something else. "I should—" she started. "Yeah," he said. She didn't move immediately, neither did he. They sat there in the cold with the blankets and the dark street, and the particular quality of a thing that's new and fragile and real, and she thought about what she'd said at the lake. I am here, right now, I am here, and felt it with an acuteness she wasn't used to. She went home eventually. She walked back to her house alone, across the 30 feet of yard that was always just 30 feet, and the light in her bedroom was the only lit window on the street. She stood in her kitchen with her coat still on and her face still cold from the night air, and she stood there for a long time, not moving, not doing anything, just being in the fact of it. She was terrified. She was not going to stop. She went to bed and did not lie awake, which was its own kind of answer. The morning after felt like any other morning, which was somehow the right thing. Victoria woke up to her alarm at 7, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, and worked for 2 hours. The street outside was ordinary December. A thin frost on the car roofs, someone's dog doing its morning circuit, the amber light of a cold sun coming in low from the east. Nothing had changed on Clover Mill Road. The houses were the same houses. The distances between them were the same distances. And yet, she kept the laptop open and stared at the same paragraph for 11 minutes before she accepted that she wasn't reading it, closed it, and sat with her coffee in the morning and the fact of what had happened on the porch the night before. She was not a person who catastrophized. She was not particularly a person who romanticized. She was someone who had learned, the hard way and over a long time, to look at things as they were rather than as she needed them to be. So she looked at it clearly. She had kissed Mason Reed, or he had kissed her, or they had kissed each other in the cooperative and mutually arrived at way that meant neither version was exactly right and both were. She had known for weeks that this was where they were heading and had not prevented it and did not regret it. She was 30 years old and she had loved someone and lost him and survived it. Not cleanly, not quickly, but genuinely. And the survival had cost her something and also returned something she hadn't expected. A specific, hard-won willingness to be present in her own life that she had not previously possessed. She was not replacing David. She had sat at his kitchen table and held all of it and come back different. And what she understood now that she hadn't understood before was that loving someone new doesn't erase the one who came first. It just means you are someone large enough to hold more than one true thing at a time. She hadn't known she was that large. She was finding out. She finished her coffee and went to Mason's house. He opened the door looking like he hadn't slept much, which she took as information. He had coffee already made and poured her a cup without asking, and they sat at the kitchen table, the same table in the same chairs, and looked at each other in the morning light. "Hi," she said. Same word as the night before. Deliberate. "Hi," he said. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone waiting to understand what they were dealing with. "I'm not going to make this weird," she said. "It's already a little weird." "It's a little weird," she agreed. "That's okay." He turned his coffee cup. How are you?" "I'm good," she said. "I'm actually good." She paused. "Are you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He said it like he was checking it against reality and finding it accurate, which was how he said most things. "Good," she said. They sat with the morning for a minute. "Lily's going to know," he said. "Lily already knows," Victoria said. "She told me 3 weeks ago that I smile more around you." He looked at the table. "She's going to have opinions about it." "She's going to have enormous opinions about it," Victoria agreed. "I'm prepared for that." "Are you?" "I've been taking the deep-sea creature readings at full volume for 2 months. I can handle opinions." He almost smiled, almost became a real smile, the kind that changed his face. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. It was not a smooth conversation. There were pauses and half-sentences and moments where both of them were navigating something without a map. But it was honest, and honesty had always been the thing between them. The thing that made all the silences comfortable rather than loaded. The thing that had made her trust him before she'd articulated to herself that she trusted him. They were not making any grand declarations at a kitchen table on a December morning. They were two people who had arrived at something real and were choosing to treat it with care. That was enough. That was, in fact, the right size for the morning. She called her partners in Columbus that afternoon. It was a call she'd been building toward for weeks without committing to it, and she made it standing in her kitchen with the winter bare yard visible through the window and the specific steadiness of someone who has finished deciding something. She told them she wasn't coming back to Columbus to live. She told them she could manage the firm from a satellite arrangement indefinitely. They had already proven this was operationally possible, and that she was willing to travel to Columbus for board meetings and major negotiations, but that Delwood, Indiana, was where she intended to be. There was a silence on the call. Her partner Marcus, who had been with her since year 2 and who was professionally unflappable in a way that sometimes annoyed her, said, "Is this permanent?" "I don't know what permanent means," she said. "This is what I know right now." Is something going on? Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," she said. "That's actually why I'm calling." Another silence, different quality. "Okay," Marcus said. He was processing. She could hear him processing. "Let's talk about what we need to restructure." They talked for an hour. It wasn't easy. There were legitimate concerns, legitimate questions about her capacity and her presence and what it meant for the company going forward. She answered them all honestly. She made concessions where concessions were reasonable and held firm where they weren't. And at the end of the call, she had a workable framework and the particular exhaustion of having done something difficult in exactly the way it needed to be done. She hung up and sat down. She'd been running Sinclair Capital on the adrenaline of constant motion for a decade. She was going to run it differently now, more deliberately, with more intention about what she wanted to build and why she was building it. The company would not suffer for this. She believed that, and the call had confirmed it. What would suffer, if anything, was the version of herself that had used the company as a place to put everything she didn't want to feel. That version of herself could stand to lose a little ground. She texted Mason. Made the call. Staying. He texted back 2 minutes later. Good. Then after a pause. Lily wants to make a cake. She says it's for celebrating. I haven't told her anything yet. Victoria stared at her phone. How does she know? She's 7. I don't know how she knows anything. Victoria laughed at her phone, alone in her kitchen, the real laugh, unguarded. It was becoming, she noticed, a more frequent occurrence. She was getting her laugh back. She hadn't fully understood it was missing until she started finding it again. The loan structure took 3 weeks to formalize. Victoria had been clear with herself about how she wanted to approach it before she raised it again with Mason. She'd done this kind of deal structure enough times professionally that the mechanics were routine, and the key was making it genuinely what she'd said it would be. A market-rate loan, standard terms, nothing that created a power imbalance or an obligation that would bend the space between them. She'd asked a lawyer she trusted, not from her own firm, to draw up clean paperwork. She put it on his kitchen table one evening in late December without preamble. "Look at it before you say anything," she said. He looked at it. He took his time. Actually read it, which she'd expected. He wasn't the kind of person who skimmed things that mattered. And when he was done, he set it down and was quiet for a moment. "Market rate," he said. "Yes. 5-year term. With a 2-year grace period on principal because startup cash flow is what it is." He looked at the numbers again. This is structured exactly like a bank loan." "That's because it is a bank loan, except the bank is me, and I know the borrower's work, and I'm not going to foreclose on you for a single missed month." She paused. "But everything else is the same. Payments, interest, terms. You default, there are consequences. You pay it back, which I believe you will. It's entirely yours." He sat back. She watched him doing the thing he did when he was working through something that mattered. The quiet, the stillness, the jaw set at a particular angle. "I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you," she said. "I'm doing it because the business is viable, and the capital gap is the only obstacle, and I have the capital, and I'd like to see what you build." "You'd like to see it," he said, and there was something in his tone. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to watch you build something that's yours. That matters to me." She paused. "Not as a project. As someone who—" She stopped. "Say it," he said. He'd said that to her before. She was starting to understand it was his way of not letting her retreat from the honest version. "As someone who loves you," she said. "That's why I'd like to see it." The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the tiredness, not the careful composure, not the private warmth he had with Lily. Something more open than any of that. Something that cost him to show. I'm not... He stopped. I'm not good at this part, he said. The saying it part. I know, she said. I'm working on it. I know that too. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, which was not something he'd done before, and he left it there. And she turned her hand over, and they stayed like that for a moment with the papers on the table between them and the December dark outside the window and the house quiet around them. I'll sign it, he said. Okay, she said. And I... He stopped again, breathed. Yeah, me too. He said it looking at her directly, which she understood cost him something, and the cost made it more true. Yeah, she said. I know. He signed the papers on New Year's Eve. It was not romantic timing. It was simply when the lawyer had everything finalized, and when Mason had gone through it with Dana, who was a paralegal and had strong opinions about contract language, and when he was satisfied that every term was what it said it was. He signed it at his kitchen table on a cold Tuesday morning with Lily present, because Lily had asked to be present, and Mason had said yes in the way he said yes to things Lily needed to witness, quietly and without making a production of it. Lily watched him sign and then looked at Victoria and said, Is this about the shop? Yes, Victoria said, the shop you're going to build. That Dad is going to build, Victoria said. Yes? Lily looked at her father. I get to name something, she said. That's the rule when something big happens. There's no such rule, Mason said. There should be, Lily said. Mason looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Mason. What would you name it? Victoria asked. Lily thought about this with the deep seriousness she brought to important questions. Reed's, she said. Because it's ours. Mason was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that he didn't hide, just let be there, and Victoria saw it and looked away to give him the privacy of it. Reed's it is, he said. Well, the building on the east side of town had good bones, which was the first thing Mason said when they walked through it together in January, and which was also, Victoria thought, the thing he said about most things worth keeping. It had good bones. It needed work. Those two facts were not contradictory. They walked the space with a contractor named Phil Hershey, who had done half the commercial renovations in Delwood over the past 20 years, and who shook Victoria's hand and then Mason's and treated them as a unit without making anything of it, which she appreciated. Phil pointed out the structural issues, the electrical that needed updating, the floor drains that were salvageable, the ceiling height that was genuinely excellent for the kind of work Mason intended. Mason asked questions that revealed each time that he'd already thought about the answer and was checking his thinking against reality, which was how he approached everything. Lily had come. She'd brought a notebook and was writing things down with the gravity of an official observer. What are you documenting? Victoria asked her at one point. Everything, Lily said. For history. That's thorough. Somebody has to, Lily said. Phil gave them the scope and the number, which was significant and not surprising, and they drove back to Clover Mill Road with Mason quiet in the driver's seat and Lily reading her notes aloud in the back and Victoria watching the winter fields go past and thinking about good bones and the work it takes to make something from them. You're thinking, Mason said. I'm always thinking. What about? That it's the right building, she said. He nodded, slowly. Yeah, he said. It is. Winter moved towards spring the way it does in Indiana, reluctantly and not in a straight line. There were warm days in February that felt like a promise, and then cold snaps in March that felt like a retraction. And then one morning in April, Victoria woke up and the trees on Clover Mill Road had that electric green edge of new leaves coming and the air was genuinely warm, and she stood on her porch with her coffee and felt the season turn. Construction on the building had started in February, moving faster than expected because Mason had spent the winter doing the planning work with an engineer's rigor, had the permits cleared before the paperwork was dry, and had the structural work scheduled so tightly that Phil Hershey had called him on the second week to say he'd never had a client who showed up at the job site knowing more about the sequence than the crew. Mason had said thank you and showed up again the next morning. Victoria had stopped by the site regularly, not because she was overseeing anything, she was not, and wouldn't have presumed, but because she liked to watch him in that space. He moved through the building with a different quality than she saw anywhere else, something that was his natural pace when nothing was being managed or restrained. He saw the finished thing in the half-constructed space, and that made him certain, and watching him be certain was one of the better things she'd found in this year of finding things. She had restructured her role at Sinclair Capital in ways that were still settling but were working. She went to Columbus once a month, stayed for 3 days, moved through the meetings and the decisions with the same capabilities she'd always had, but with a different relationship to it. Less attached to it as an identity, more clear about it as a thing she was good at and chose to do. The distance had counterintuitively made her a sharper leader. She had perspective now that she'd never had when she was inside it every waking hour. Priya had stopped asking about her timeline for returning. She'd started asking about Lily, who came up frequently enough in conversations that Priya had a complete picture without having been given one deliberately. "She sounds like a force of nature," Priya had said once. "She's decided she wants to work in my office when she's older," Victoria had said. "She's drawing up a job description." "What's the job?" "Head of everything important, I think. She's still finalizing the title." Priya had laughed, genuinely, and Victoria had felt the particular warmth of someone who knew her witnessing her happiness and being glad of it. The conversation with Renata Hartley happened in March, over the phone, a long one, the kind that wanders into honesty because you've both been careful for long enough that careful gets tired. They'd been talking for 40 minutes, mostly about Renata's garden and a trip she was planning to see her sister, when Renata said, "Are you happy, Victoria?" Victoria was at her kitchen window. The yard was still winter brown, but there were crocuses coming up along the fence, purple and white, the first color in months. "Yes," she said. "I think I'm actually happy." She paused. "Is that strange to say?" "No," Renata said, and then, quietly, "David would be glad. I want you to know I believe that." Victoria held the phone against her ear and looked at the crocuses and let herself feel all of it. The grief that had changed shape but hadn't gone. The love that didn't erase or diminish. The woman she was becoming that David had never known, and that Renata was choosing to be glad about anyway. "I didn't think I'd be able to do this," Victoria said. "Move forward. I didn't think I had it in me." "You always did," Renata said. "You just hadn't needed it yet." They talked for another 20 minutes. When she hung up, Victoria stood at the window for a long time, the crocuses doing their quiet, insistent work in the yard, and she felt something settle in her chest, the specific settling of something long held finally finding its place. Not gone, not erased, just placed, carefully and honestly, where it belonged. She texted Mason, "Can I come over tonight?" He texted back, "You don't have to ask." She knew that. She asked anyway because asking was a choice, and choices were how you told people what they meant to you. The shop opened on a Saturday in late May. It opened without ceremony, which was how Mason wanted it. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just a sign going up, and the doors opening and the first car pulling in at 9:15, a neighbor's truck that had been making a sound for 2 months that nobody else in town had been able to diagnose. Mason diagnosed it in 12 minutes. The neighbor stayed for 45, sitting in the new waiting area, actual chairs, decent coffee, clean floors, and talking to Phil Hershey, who had come by just to see it, and Dana, who had taken the morning off work and showed up with donuts and a card that made Mason's face do the thing that meant he was more moved than he was willing to fully show. Lily was there, in a Reed's t-shirt that was 3 sizes too big, wearing it belted at the waist like a dress, carrying her notebook. She had appointed herself the official record keeper and was documenting the opening with the solemnity of an archivist. Victoria stood at the edge of the bay in the morning light and watched it happen. She thought about a broken garden hose, a man climbing out of a moving truck, standing in the driveway looking at a house he wasn't entirely sure about, a little girl spinning with her arms out for no reason except that she was happy about something she couldn't name. She thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere by accident and find, after enough time, that the accident had its own logic, that the things you stumble into without intention are sometimes exactly where you were supposed to end up, even though supposed is a word that requires belief in something larger than accident, And she was not a person who reached for large explanations. She believed in smaller ones, in the specific, accumulated weight of choices and moments, in hoses that break, and branches that fall, and storms that come through, and the particular person who shows up in them, not because they were sent, but because they were there. She believed in there. Mason came out of the bay and crossed to her and stood beside her looking at the shop. His shop, Reed's, the sign above the door in clean, dark letters. And she could see in his profile the things she'd watched grow over months. The tiredness still there. It would always be there. That was just him. But underneath it something that had been held very tight for a long time that was beginning, very slowly, to open. "How does it feel?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Like something I was supposed to do," he said. "Yeah. Like something I should have believed I could do a long time ago." He paused. "I kept talking myself out of it, telling myself it wasn't the right time, the right circumstance, the right—" He stopped. "I think I was afraid if I tried and it didn't work, I'd have given up the thing that kept me going. The idea of it. Yeah, you can hold on to an idea forever. Trying turns it into a thing that can fail." She looked at him. "It's not failing." "No," he said. "It's not." He looked at the bay where the truck was pulled in, and his first mechanic, a guy named Carlos, who'd driven 30 minutes to work here because Mason had asked him, was explaining something to the neighbor. "Dana's going to tell this story at every family dinner for the rest of my life." "She's going to tell it at your wedding and your funeral," Victoria said. "You know that." He turned to look at her when she said wedding, and she felt the word in the air between them, where she'd put it deliberately and without apology. She met his look. "That's getting ahead of things," he said, but his voice was careful in the specific way of a person who is not disagreeing with the destination, just noting the distance to it. "I know," she said. "I'm patient." He looked at her for another moment. "You are," he said. "Which I did not expect." "I'm full of surprises." Lily appeared between them, notebook open, pen ready. "I need a quote for the record," she announced, "from both of you, about the opening." "Who taught you to do oral history?" Victoria asked. "You did," Lily said. "You told me stories are how people make sense of things." Victoria looked at her. She had said that weeks ago, half thinking, the kind of thing you say and don't expect to be held to. Lily held everything. "Okay," Victoria said. "Write this down." She waited until Lily's pen was ready. "Something that's built right will outlast all of us." Lily wrote it. She looked up. "Dad?" Mason looked at his daughter with the expression that was only for her, the one that made everything else in his face go quiet. "Write this," he said. "You don't have to know where you're going to end up somewhere worth being." Lily wrote it. She examined both sentences with the critical eye of an editor. "I like Dad's better," she said. "So do I," Victoria said. Mason looked like he was going to say something and then didn't. And the morning was warm and the shop was open, and inside Dana was telling the story already, her voice carrying out into the bay, and Lily went back to her documenting. And Victoria stood beside Mason in the May sunlight and felt, simply and without qualification, that she was where she was supposed to be. What? There are things nobody tells you about grief. Not the big things. People tell you the big things, in cards and quiet conversations, and the books that well-meaning people give you. But the small, true things. That it doesn't end, it just changes territory. That it stops being the whole landscape and becomes a place you carry, a place you can visit without being destroyed by the visit. That the people you love who are gone don't disappear from you. They travel differently, moving from the center of everything into something that is woven into you, carried forward, still there. Nobody tells you that moving forward is an act of love rather than a betrayal. That staying open is the hardest thing you will ever do, and also the only real option, the only one that leads anywhere worth being. Victoria had not planned any of this. She had bought a house in Indiana to disappear for a while, to find somewhere quiet enough that she could hear herself think, and terrible enough to know if she was ready to come back. She had not come expecting a mechanic with a daughter and a dream in a notebook and a way of listening that made her feel understood for the first time in as long as she could remember. She had not come back to life. She had found it in the ordinary things, in dinner on a porch and a split hose and a storm that came through and rearranged something, In a small girl who asked direct questions and carried a notebook and had the unconditional certainty of someone who does not yet know how often the world fails to meet people halfway. And Mason Reed, who had been carrying his own weight for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to set some of it down, who had made himself small and competent and self-contained in the way that people do when they've been left and they decide, quietly and without drama, that the safest thing is to need less. Mason had done the harder thing. He had let something in. He had looked at the specific complicated reality of Victoria Sinclair and seen it clearly, all of it, the grief and the wealth and the walls and the laugh she was getting back. And he had not run the math on whether it was practical or whether he was qualified or whether the timing made sense. He had made dinner. He had held the door open. He had asked the one question nobody else had thought to ask, about who David was, about who mattered to her, and in asking it had told her more about himself than anything else could have. Two broken people, the word broken being here not a diminishment but a description of what is real, that life breaks things, that being broken is not the same as being finished, that the cracks are where the light gets in, to use the phrase everyone uses because it is true, has always been true, will always be true. They were not a fairy tale. They were not going to be. Their life together would have hard months and difficult conversations, and days when the distance between what they hoped for and what they had would feel unbridgeable. Mason would sometimes close off when he should open up. Victoria would sometimes run toward the work when what she needed was to stay still. Lily would grow up and develop the skepticism and the walls that children eventually develop, and that would be painful in the ordinary way that everything painful is. Nothing was going to be easy in the effortless sense that ease sometimes implies. But they were real, and real was better than smooth. Real lasted when smooth fades. Real has weight in history and the specific density of things that have been tested. They were two people who had found in an ordinary suburb in Indiana over an ordinary year that the willingness to be present in your own life, actually present, not running, not managing, not filling the spaces with noise until the quiet becomes bearable, is the only thing that makes any of the rest of it possible. That you cannot love anyone well from behind a wall. That the risk of being seen is exactly that, a risk, and that some risks are not reckless but necessary. The sun was on the shop sign. Lily was writing things down for history. Dana was talking too loud, and Mason's hand was near Victoria's in the easy, unannounced way of people who have stopped performing and started simply being. And on Clover Mill Road, 4 houses apart, that were no longer really apart at all, 2 lives that had arrived broken were becoming, slowly and imperfectly, and with full knowledge of the cost, something that was better than either of them had known to ask for. That is the whole of it. That is enough.